And we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, and to our debaters, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Starting with Vegan Games, nice to see you back. You've been on the Crucible many times. We're happy to have you back. Go ahead, take a minute, shout your channel out to everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm Vegan Gains. You can find me on YouTube. My YouTube handle is also Vegan Gains. I talk about veganism mostly, but I also cover political topics, theology, pretty much everything. I have a wide, diverse range of interests.
Gotcha. And then moving over to you, Father Joseph Swaden. Go ahead, shout your channel out to everybody where they can find you.
Sure. Basically, you can find us at NFTU News and Apologetics on YouTube, where our website is nftu.net. We have a presence on a lot of different social platforms, so we're pretty easy to find. We cover True Orthodox news, ecumenism, modernism, basically, things that are relevant to our time, and this happens to be one of them. The question of diet is important, and the question of lifestyle, but we'll get to that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, gentlemen, before we get the debate started, just a couple of housekeeping rules. I just expect both of you to adhere to moderation. I won't over moderate, but what I will do is keep the direction of the conversation going where it needs to go. If there's a spirited back and forth, I'm not going to interrupt too much unless I need to in order to get the conversation back on track. I do understand both of you guys have an aggressive debate style. I'm okay with that. I have one myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to open up, Father Joseph Swaden, and I'm going to give you 7 minutes, and then Vegan Gains will have 7 minutes to respond, and then we'll open the floor up and let you guys go back and forth for about an hour, 20 minutes right in there. From there, we'll be taking on callers, getting to super chats. So if you guys out in the audience want to call in tonight, whether you're on Vegan Gains's channel, you can go into the Crucible's Discord. The mods will give you the link. Same thing for any followers of Father Joseph Swaden. They can come over. Our mods will vet you and get you in for a call. And that'll be later. We'll make an announcement about 15 minutes before the callers need to start stacking up. With that, Joseph, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Okay, well, good evening. This is kind of an odd topic. And I say that it's an odd topic because of the fact that as many Orthodox followers and people who listen to this would wonder, why would we debate a vegan? Orthodox Christians they fast for almost half a year, where we don't eat meat. We often don't eat fish. And we have often plant-based substitutes. Many of our own dietary and fasting regulations work with that, including in a monastic setting. And that is actually why I want to discuss it, because the why is the most important thing. When we fast, as Orthodox Christians do, we're doing it not only out of love for God, but to improve our own body and to some degree improve the environment. That's part of the reason for the Jubilee in the Old Testament. And that's where a lot of that comes from. I would argue that a vegan perspective is very, very different. Whereas fasting is an act of love on our part for God and neighbor, veganism is in some way, shape, or form, and I'm not saying anything about my opponent personally, but it seems to be almost a system of imposition. If I could quickly just share a slide here, I don't know if that's something I can do. Let me see here. I'm going to try here.
Yeah, you can. You hit the present button. Yep. And then just click share and I'll pull it up for you.
All right. Yeah. And I've got a few things. So we're going to start here. One of the things that is often asked, and, in terms of why people eat meat, why people don't eat meat, this is actually a commentary that was collected by Alcuin of York. And it's talking about why is the eating of flesh permitted to man after the flood and not before. And the answer is because of the unfruitfulness of the earth, it is thought, and because of man's weakness. So it's to be understood ultimately that people were able not just after the fall, but before the flood, were surviving primarily on vegetables, but that the quality of the earth had changed after the flood. And so there is a natural tendency where people could not be nourished in the same way. Now, I'm going to bring that up here, and I'm going to start switching a bit, because this is a standard Orthodox calendar. It's a Moscow Patriarchate calendar. I've moved it to Friday so one can see that there is fasting, there's food with oil. For those who aren't familiar, there are different gradations in Orthodoxy in terms of fasting. First off, fasting and abstinence being two different things, one being not eating and the other one being limitation of certain foods. So for a good part of the year, including every Wednesday and Friday, Orthodox Christians of the general Eastern Rite, there's no fish even, there's no dairy, there's no meat, and among Western Rite, fish is allowed. But the more important thing is that this is every week, every Great Lent, and every Christmas fast, every Apostles fast, every Dormition fast. These are multiple week fasts that end up coming close to almost half a year. So from that perspective, one would ask, why would then I necessarily be against veganism? I would say that to some degree, it almost seems like I'd be for it. And if you look even in the monastic orders of the church, St. John the Romanian was known for talking about different levels of asceticism. And what I mean by that is that as people grew older in monastic life, etc., some would give up the eating of fish. Some would give up even further, where they would just be eating fruits and vegetables. I believe that's, y'all call that a fruitarian or something. The point is, till they're just literally, once they're very old, very skilled in asceticism, they can just survive even on the Holy Eucharist. Just the Holy Eucharist. But the problem is this, is that without a moral background, without an orthodox understanding of what the fast is, without that struggle, you end up with this. The simple reality is that, unfortunately, morally uncontrolled attempts at limitation of food can have disastrous consequences. I do not blame my opponent for the death of this vegan influencer. I do not blame my opponent for the death of this little kid who died because of the fact that she was being fed. The boy was being fed almond milk instead of real milk. Those people are victims of a system that is destructive. And I hate to say this, but even vegan gains here. I did not know I was going to be debating you until today. I thought I was debating another vegan, so you're kind of a vegan substitute. But in any case, the point is that even, I hate to say this, but insofar as you're an advertiser for veganism, unfortunately, you're also hamstringing yourself. I understand you're a bodybuilder of some type. Is that correct? I think so.
Yep.
And so the point is, you're hamstringing yourself because of the loss of nutrients and all sorts of other things that we could go through. It's a tear from a purely even non-spiritual standpoint. There is no real good case to be made for restriction of all animal content. But more importantly, from a spiritual standpoint, it's actually destructive. I understand that a lot of the whole modern vegan mythos is very similar to a kind of karmic retribution, that sort of thing. I don't know what your belief system is on that. I think it's worth discussing. But the point is, there's a lot we can do for our part, for God, for man, and for the earth, being good stewards of it. I just don't see veganism as some way that's even feasible. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. And thank you.
Thank you so much for that opening statement. Vegan Gains going to give you the same amount of time to respond, 7 minutes on the clock. You can take as much of it or as little of it as you want before we open the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we have a surprising amount of agreement. Coming into this, I thought you were going to have a different perspective, but one way in which we differ for why we might have an interest in eating a plant-based diet is just where we ground ourselves. I think you ground yourself in Christian ethics. I ground myself in a more modern idea of human rights, and I believe animal rights are a logical extension of human rights. And I don't see a substantive enough difference between humans and animals to where I would deny animals human rights. And I would just challenge anyone who disagrees with that to name a trait or set of traits that animals are lacking. And in order to be logically consistent, if these traits were lacking in a human being, you would have to accept the idea of taking away those human rights from a human being if your basis for taking away human rights from animals is a lack of those traits. On top of that, to respond to your claim about hamstringing yourself, being, having issues with nutrition, you can get all the nutrients you need on a vegan diet, including things like B12, vitamin D. We do have modern technology on our side where you can take B12 supplements. You can take multivitamins if you need to. And I think for the entirety of the world, multivitamins and supplementation have been a benefit. If you look at deficiency rates across the human population, most people are deficient in something. Vitamin D, for instance, 84% of the American population is deficient in vitamin D. And it would benefit everybody if they took a vitamin D supplement. So that's just one example. On top of that, in terms of macronutrients, you can get all the fat, carbohydrate, and protein you need on a vegan diet. There's not a substantive difference when it comes to bioavailability of protein on a vegan diet. There are some differences, but generally there's about a 3% or so difference in terms of bioavailability. And when you look at nitrogen balance studies, the slope and intercept of nitrogen balance seems to be identical between vegan and omnivorous diets, so long as protein is equated. So that's just my opening statement.
Okay, and with that, before we get into the back and forth, I just want to remind everybody who is just now joining the stream, send in a super chat via the Dono chat. If you have a question for either of the debaters tonight, you can also send it in via YouTube by clicking the $sign and consider becoming a channel member. We appreciate it very much. With that, gentlemen, the floor is open. Go ahead.
Thank you for that opening statement. I do have a couple of questions. I mean, just leaving aside vitamin D supplements, because ultimately that could be solved if the American populace walked outside every morning for 5 minutes, because vitamin D naturally produces in the body. But more importantly, one question I did have for you is, and I mentioned this, the whole bodybuilder thing. You mentioned supplementation. That strikes me as, I hate to say this, but kind of hard. My son, one of my sons, I have a few sons, but one of my sons got into bodybuilding for a while, especially during the earlier period of his young adulthood, and got really into it. Now, I noticed he'd be eating things like, he'd eat like 4 or 5 chicken breasts at a time and stuff like that because of the massive protein levels. I'm not even sure how that would be done, because even things like the Impossible Burger, which I am very much interested in, does not actually have the same nutritional profile as a burger made of ground beef. Despite having years of laboratory work and science put on this, it still didn't add up. I mean, functionally, it looks like it bleeds, but nutritionally, it's not as valuable as a burger. And so my question here is ultimately, it's 2 parts. My question is, first, how does one, and this is just for my own education, match up that massive protein deficit personally? And more importantly, how is this sort of weird laboratory setup for living, this almost a Soylent solution, better than just eating meat?
Yeah, sure.
Our body's designed for it.
Sure. So if you look at studies directly analyzing body composition changes in response to protein intake, it seems like the most amount of protein you can intake and actually benefit from and grow more muscle is about 0.75 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So for a 200-pound man, that would be about 150 grams of protein. That's extremely easy to get on a vegan diet. So you could eat just normal whole foods like tofu, beans, lentils. You could also eat things like seitan, not Satan.
I know
Seitan.
it's
Yeah.
wheat gluten. I'm familiar.
Yeah, so it's wheat gluten. It's 80% protein. If you look at most recipes, usually they work out. So usually most recipes use about 100 grams of wheat gluten. So you're getting 80 grams of protein in only one serving. So it's very easy to meet your protein needs. And if you look at the paper, Dietary Protein and Amino Acids in Vegetarian Diets, a review, I believe it was a paper from Stanford University. They looked at nitrogen balance studies, and again, nitrogen balance is basically the only macronutrient that contains nitrogen is protein. So when you look at nitrogen balance, you're looking at protein balance. So if your nitrogen balance is negative, you're losing protein, so you're probably losing muscle mass. If you have a positive nitrogen balance, you're gaining protein, so you're probably gaining muscle mass. The actual slope and intercept of nitrogen balance is, again, identical between a vegan and omnivorous diet so long as protein is equated. So, yeah, protein isn't an issue on a vegan diet.
Okay, so it's basically like most of the is that a dog?
Yeah, I got 3 dogs.
Interesting. I have a question about that.
Yeah,
later.
and a cat.
But yeah. Oh, and a cat.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I've got another question. But not yet. In any case, so basically the solution in terms of you would just eat like 4 or 5 cubes of the soy stuff, or like one of those big, gluten things. Because I've had the gluten. I actually like the fake steak they make with the gluten, so I understand completely on that one. Okay, and so basically that answers that question. You mentioned something else, and this was that human rights, if you believe in human rights, you believe in, and you can believe in animal rights, or should believe in animal rights, as I understand it. Why do I have to believe in rights at all?
Well, you don't. But again, most people do. I think to some extent you do as well. So we can explore that.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So yeah, that's that's all. That was all. Those were all my questions for now. But I'm gonna be bringing up the dog and cat later, though, out of curiosity, because they're very surprised, to say the least. Did you have any questions for me, or should I just continue?
Yeah, I'm interested in the idea of you possibly not believing in the idea of human rights.
Okay.
Yeah, so can you explain what you mean by that?
Human rights are granted by physical governments. They're
Sure.
not that ultimately it's what we know as a social contract is literally a contract, which means that if the contract is broken, said rights, promises, etc., don't exist. I personally do not. This is just personal. I personally do not believe we have a functioning democratic republic anymore. I think we live in a coup, and frankly, that's it's supposedly free speech, but nobody really cares whether or not I say it. The simple reality is people live in coups and harsh regimes all over the world. Why should I be surprised if this is any different, except that we have iPhones? I mean, really, the question is, who grants you rights? Now, the concept behind the Constitution, of course, is that rights are granted to men by God. That is an interesting concept. It's very deistic, but I don't see how it has any real application if your military strongman of choice decides that you're not going to have freedom of assembly anymore or freedom of speech. These rights have been suspended, have been thrown away many times. Why should I, if I don't believe that human rights are real, why would I believe that animal rights are real?
Yeah, okay. So it is a problem that we have governments who maybe form an oligarchy, we're non-democratic, things like that. And yeah, rights have to be granted. You're right. Now, usually when I bring up the topic of rights, I'm talking from somebody's personal perspective of what rights they believe should be granted. So even if let's say we live in an oligarchy and technically we didn't have any rights, your right to free speech could be taken away if you say the wrong thing, or you could be locked up, or
That's happening now.
Yeah, to some extent. But again, I'm debating you, right? I'm not debating the American Republic or anything. So, from your perspective, you would believe in like a principle of universal human rights where everybody should have protection under the law from, getting hurt, killed, property stolen from. I think you believe in free speech principles, things like that.
Insofar as I can formally accept them, yes, but that would simply make them a moral. That would simply make them a moral standpoint from my perspective. They would be unenforceable, and so ultimately, my perspective on that would be irrelevant. If again, I'm not a governing body, at least not today. If I was, of course, those things would be important to me to some degree. Free speech to a slightly more limited degree, but the point is, I'm not in charge. Insofar as I am, then the rules apply as I see fit. So ultimately, that is. It sounds like there should be a universal here, but I don't see it. A good example is we take freedom of religion very seriously in America. For example, I do not believe in freedom of religion. I think everyone should become Orthodox. I believe that heretics should be quieted down. I believe that degenerates should get jail time. So I don't believe in a lot of the things that um, that you would call I guess you could say that are part of that package of American rights, which I grew up with, sounded great, loved it, but experiments have an end.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So, the one point you made that, so because this is only from your perspective, this is just your moral view. It's not necessarily rights.
Right.
Like the idea behind having rights comes from this idea of what would be, morally good. So they're a little interchangeable. Yeah, like the distinction between morals and rights are that rights are enforced. But and on top of that, you aren't technically a governing body, but you are a governing body of yourself. I'm sure you would live life and apply your rules of ethics and your morals the way you see fit. So we might differ in terms of what morals or what rights we would be interested in granting to human beings. I'm a free speech advocate, and I believe in freedom of religion. To some extent, you're against free speech when it comes to heresy.
I'm pornography. Pornography, I'm really big on.
Sure. But I do think we agree on a lot of other things. I think we believe that people shouldn't be murdered, or think we shouldn't steal. I think we agree that children shouldn't be exploited. So, I am against child prawn. I don't know if I allowed to say certain terms on here. But yeah, so from that perspective, I would say in order to be logically consistent, you would have to grant those same rights or moral principles to animals. And I would ask you, from your perspective, could you name a trait that's lacking in animals that, if lacking in human beings, would justify that difference in treatment? Or sorry, let me say that again. Name a trait that's lacking in animals that, if lacking in human beings, would justify, say, you treating those human beings the way you would treat animals right now, where, I'm assuming sometimes you eat meat.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I'm just interested in what trait or set of traits a human being could lack where you would be okay with, say, having a human being at a burger or steak or something.
None. I believe that a human being, unlike animals, is a unique creation of God. So
Okay.
it would be impossible for me to say that animals and humans are the same. I understand where your worldview may be coming from, and that's probably based on the whole evolutionary mindset that we're all animals and stuff. I don't believe that. And that's not the church's teaching. The church's teaching is that human beings are a unique creation by God.
Okay, so being a unique creation from God would be the trait, essentially. And you think there aren't any human beings that lack that trait,
Correct.
but animals do lack that trait.
Correct.
Okay.
That said, that doesn't. I don't want to. Remember that the human being in Orthodox anthropology is designed to be responsible for creation, and so animals are part of creation. So it's not like we have a blank check to like factory farm and create like massive destruction. No, our job is to take care of the earth, and that's a responsibility that, to some degree, I think I think a number of vegans kind of instinctually understand that, but don't realize how much that is going through their philosophy. But yeah, that care of the earth is what makes us human.
Well,
But
I
that's
think
also
we have a lot of common ground there, though, and maybe we can get to that a bit later. But yeah, on the name the trait topic. So, since you believe human beings should be granted these sorts of rights or moral value in your worldview versus animals, because they're a unique creation from God,
okay.
if we say if we hypothetically could find human beings that weren't a unique creation from God, you'd be fine with killing and eating those humans?
Those wouldn't be humans. I mean, what you're asking ultimately is the pygmy question. Ultimately, if we talk about like certain Bantu groups and pygmies, they would eat pygmies because they considered them not human because they were midgets. I do not subscribe to that. I believe that both the Bantu and the pygmy are human. Unfortunately, people do can apply that heuristic and have. But no, I would say that every human is created in the image and likeness of God. On a recent show we had done, we talked about the existence of dog-faced people. This is something very common in the cryptid community, but that was speculated and theorized in many of the ancient writings, and people even talk about the existence of such people now. But Saint Augustine points out, if those people were capable of reasoning like humans, even if their language was strange, so on and so forth, they're humans. So yeah, humans can be very, very different creatures, but we're always going to be humans. But your dog is never going to be a human. Your dog's a dog.
So how do you identify a human? Like, what's your definition of a human being?
Well, a human being has the ability to tell right from wrong. They have the ability to learn, and they have the ability to communicate with their creator in ways that are pretty standard throughout human history.
So this has nothing to do with, say, genetics or reproduction?
Well, genetics is a fairly recent science, and we knew what humans were before genetics. But the point is that, that does confirm that there are, for example, repetitive structures. You can find repetitive structures at a cellular level, not just in humans and, say, monkeys, but in humans and fish. And you can find that in birds and fish and but the point is, the fact that we all have common organic building blocks, which is, I see that completely, doesn't change the fact that humans have always understood what humans were in a fairly, with exception of certain small groups like I mentioned with the pygmies. Humans have generally recognized other humans as human.
Right, but I'm just wondering, is your definition of human being, does that have anything to do with like biology, genetics, genomic structure, anything like that? Or is it entirely
contribute? I mean, you're asking me what defines a human, and I'm trying to define it in both a spiritual but also a biological sense.
Maybe
I wouldn't deny genomics, etc. But that's...
Sure. Okay, so let me ask like a maybe a clarifying question. So, like you've seen Star Trek, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, any alien species from Star Trek? So, Klingons. What are the pointy-eared guys again?
The Vulcans.
Yeah, the Vulcans. Mm-hmm. If say they were real somehow, like Star Trek was right, Vulcans were real. Sure. They're not human beings, correct? Like they're Vulcans in your view?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that they're a different kind of human being because of the fact that if we remember, Spock is half Vulcan and half human, which means that they were able to mate and reproduce. That would tell me that this is a very different kind of human, but clearly if it produces a human, it's a human.
Okay.
And there's half Klingons too. So Klingons could also reproduce with humans, which would also make them human.
Okay. I think there are a few species in Star Trek that couldn't interbreed with humans, or at least wasn't confirmed anyway.
I haven't. Yeah, I'm not big on the whole Star Trek mythos. Sorry.
Sure. Okay, but let's use Mass Effect as an example, like a video game. There are species in Mass Effect that can't interbreed.
I don't know what that is, but okay, I'll go with it.
Sure. So let's say an alien species that was very much like a human being, same overall body structure, 5 fingers, eyes, had language, but couldn't interbreed with a human. You would be fine with turning them into hamburgers because they're not a unique creation from God?
Well, first off, you're asking me a theoretical question about a theoretical creature and asking whether God would count that as a human. The problem is that we're not dealing with actual creatures. We're dealing with theoretical ones. Yeah, sure. I mean, one could make the argument, well, why can't they reproduce? That could be scientifically studied, so on and so forth. But in the end, we're not talking about real things. So, I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment, but in the end, if you're asking me what God would say for that, I wouldn't have an answer. 1, because I'm not God, and 2, because it's a thought experiment.
Yeah, so it is a thought experiment. It isn't real. I don't know if aliens do exist or not, but what is real are your beliefs. And if your beliefs tell you that if something is not a unique creation from God, it's okay to kill and eat it, then if we were to be in that situation, you'd be fine with killing and eating like a highly intelligent creature with culture, because it's not a unique creation from God. Well, I gave you the alien example, so like aliens visited Earth. It doesn't need to be a real one. I'm just testing your principles.
Right, but all of my principles are based on things that are identifiable.
Is God identifiable?
I believe so.
Okay, well, I've never seen God, never heard him, never spoken to him.
We can work on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people haven't. And again, like if this were a real thing, like I don't know why this is still. Like if God was a very real presence, it's kind of strange that we're still having debates on whether or not he exists. So I could say that your God has your God may be like a fantasy or hypothetical, just like this alien example.
I would argue that the reason we still have debates on the existence of God is because of the persistent intractability of man and his lack of a desire to follow God's will.
Right, but my point is, if you're going to say you're not going to answer a hypothetical question on the basis of it not being based in reality, like, well, I mean, I could deny any question you propose to me that has anything to do with God, because I could say it's not based in reality. Like, we're talking about moral principles, and I'm just trying to test your moral principles here.
Well, and that's fair. I'm not bothered by it, but I will switch back to reality when we're talking about things that have real consequences. And when we are talking about whether real animals, have rights, real rights, as compared to humans, real humans, I see no reason to go into the hypothetical to justify my position. The simple reality is, and we haven't even talked about it, since I don't believe in human rights, it obviously follows that I probably don't believe in animal rights, because animals don't believe in rights because they can't even conceive rights. So the point is, we're ascribing rights to animals that aren't even aware that they exist. Can you tell me that your dogs understand that they have the rights that you claim?
Well, hang on. Before we pass through this avenue, what Vegan Gains said is a hypothetical to test your logic is valid. It is a valid hypothetical to test your logic. There's no problem unless you can come up with why it's a contradiction or something like this. I don't see what grounds you would really have to dismiss answering to the hypothetical. It's a valid hypothetical.
Well, and let me just say this, like you mentioned, you only care about real world things that have consequences. Well, one real world consequence of this issue is people getting the idea that you have that it's okay to kill things that aren't that weren't uniquely made in the image of God, and that has caused mass killings of pygmies. So, again,
that
there
wasn't
are real
Christian tribe.
consequences to your moral views, and it's resulted in quite a few human deaths, unfortunately. So,
If I may, in the first place, those were not Christian tribes, so it would not be ascribing my worldview. In the second place, to answer the question of your hypothetical, what I was saying was I don't know, and we would require further study in the case of your hypothetical 99% human that for some reason doesn't reproduce with humans but acts like a human in every other way. But the point is, ultimately, the question has to be, when we're talking about situations that are grounded in reality, as you pointed out, this had caused the deaths of, I don't know if it was thousands of pygmies. I have no idea how many pygmies died. I don't think you know either. Maybe you do. But the point is that ultimately, the reason that they did harm the pygmies was because they didn't believe they were human. It was dehumanization that caused that. And so my point is that dehumanization can also take a number of other different forms. And ultimately, I think that to some degree, veganism dehumanizes as well. So yeah,
all right.
But
Yeah, well, I have two things to say to that. If people were following my worldview, they would have never killed pygmies. Whereas it is conceivable if people were following your worldview, they may have killed pygmies if they were convinced pygmies were not human and made in the unique image of God.
Your worldview is 70 years old.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, regardless, it is conceivable that those pygmies would have been killed if they were following your worldview, where it would be inconceivable if they believed in my worldview that they'd killed pygmies.
I disagree completely. I think that the church would be very clear that pygmies are human, and I don't think that I would accept your position. I think that you're basically making an aspersion over my faith, but you don't actually understand it, and that's fine. But I'm not going to just sit here and say, well, that's actually what would happen. You're wrong.
Okay, and secondly, you gave the answer. You don't know. You'd have to study. So
that is a hypothetical alien.
I outlined all the circumstances in the hypothetical. Like, what don't you know? Like, what information are you missing in the hypothetical where you'd give an answer like, I don't know?
Why they don't reproduce it the same way? That was my question. If it's
okay,
humanoid, I would wonder why it doesn't work.
Yeah, sure. So in the case of an alien civilization coming to Earth and they're not able to reproduce with humans, the reason they're not able to reproduce is because of incompatible genetics, like the same reason a cat and dog can't reproduce, or the same reason a human can't breed with an ostrich. So in that case, if we were to find a very intelligent, cultured race like Vulcans, or it could be any alien species that couldn't reproduce with humans for that reason, would you be okay with killing and eating them?
I think, frankly, if we were dealing with a hyper-intelligent alien race that could not reproduce with us, but could still travel through space and arrive, I think I'd be more concerned with whether they're going to eat us than whether we're going to eat them.
Okay, sure, but as far as the question, if you'd be okay with killing and eating them,
I wouldn't even know how to respond to that. I mean, frankly, I don't like the idea of eating, say, for example, monkey, because it does bear some kind of resemblance to a human, but it is a popular dish in many countries. I personally, it doesn't strike me as something I would want to do. But I'm leaving that, again, that's subjective. It's personal. It's my opinion. Would I have any moral grounds to say that such aliens, if somehow they weren't trying to eat us, that we couldn't eat them? I wouldn't. I would say that there'd probably be no reason we couldn't eat them. For the same reason, there's no reason we can't eat animals that try to kill us that are larger now.
Okay, and let's suppose the aliens weren't trying to kill and eat us and they were peaceful like us, or maybe even more peaceful than us, more benevolent. Would you be okay with killing and eating them on the basis of them not being a unique creation from God?
In all honesty, with the theory that you've put up, I would have to seriously revise my question of theology. I'd have to revise my question of anthropology. I don't know. And so, because that doesn't exist, I don't know. I mean, we could create theoretical scenarios that are so far fetched because right now we've created an alien race that is humanoid, that is capable of traveling to Earth, that is completely benevolent. Um, I don't believe in aliens. I personally think that most of the alien deception stuff is demonic. Um, I have to jump through a lot of hoops to kind of satisfy the question of whether there is a being that is not human that
In
I would not
order,
be willing to eat.
yeah. So in order for me, I'm going to try to move the because I understand where this is going. So I understand the principle of the hypothetical. It's actually a very common vegan critique. So just kind of for the purposes of this, I just want to try to like maybe give a little clarification. Vegan gains, you can tell me if I'm wrong here. What he's asking is that if you had a duplication of a human being, absent whatever the trait is that you consider to be the image of God, so let's say like a perfect clone or something like this, would you then be okay if it had all of the same physiological traits as a human being, but was absent whatever the other X thing was? What would you consider, or why is it that you wouldn't eat that being?
Well, I would, in all honesty, if we're talking about that level of similitude, I'd probably consider the alien a human being.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're talking about an alien species that's extremely similar to human but just couldn't interbreed for the same reason a cat and dog can't interbreed, you'd actually consider them human?
I can probably, if they seemed human, if they reacted like human, then
Okay.
yeah. I mean, but effectively, there are humans who can't interbreed too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, there are people with genetic disorders.
I'm not like, I'm not gonna like want to eat them.
Okay. So that kind of clarifies something for me, so that your view on what a human is isn't necessarily about genetics. So if like these principles of intelligence, culture, benevolence, maybe, if those were lacking in a human being, like, wouldn't that mean you would be okay with killing and eating a human? Because those are the traits that you seem to actually value, not like genetics being able to interbreed.
Well, I usually try to couch those in potentialities. If people say, for example, break the law, I don't think it's high time to eat them.
Yeah.
I think that would be illogical and that would be very anti-human. But the point is that I would think that valued characteristics in humans do kind of represent an important part of who they are. So yeah, I have no problem with saying that, but I don't believe like if someone isn't good that we can eat them. That strikes me as odd.
Right, but I'm not just talking about not good. So like if we were to find somebody who's human, so like they were born from a human,
Okay.
but say they were extremely unintelligent, where their intelligence might be able to be compared to a wolf. And let's say they also acted like a wolf. They just,
They were raised
killed
by
things.
wolves.
Yeah, let's say they were raised by wolves. There are feral children that were raised by wolves. And they completely lose their ability to use language, culture. They can't conceptualize, a being like a god. Would you be okay with killing and eating them?
I don't think that that's necessarily true. I don't know that animals don't conceive of God. That's an odd. I have a dog attacking me, by the way. That's why I'm doing the hand motions.
You think animals can conceptualize God or
Yeah,
like perceive
a
him?
higher
Okay.
higher item? Yeah,
That's
higher knowledge.
interesting because you said that dogs or other animals can't conceptualize something like rights.
They can't.
Okay, but they can conceptualize a being like a god?
Sure.
Okay. Would
Animals can
you?
understand hierarchy, but that doesn't mean they understand law.
Right. Well, that would be true for a lot of human beings, though, as well, right? So there's human beings that can't conceptualize law, but they could maybe conceptualize God.
Fair. Yeah, there are humans that are like that. And,
But
mhm.
yeah, but you wouldn't be comfortable with killing and eating them.
Why would I be comfortable with killing and eating them?
Yeah, like I would say that too. I wouldn't be comfortable with it.
But I'm not comfortable with killing and eating them, so I'm confused.
Yeah. So I see this as a bit of a contradiction because, you're talking about, like, you've already sort of conceded that your value of human beings doesn't really have anything to do with genetics. It seems to have to do with other traits that are typical of human beings. So, like culture, intelligence. And you've also, like, admitted that there are human beings that lack things like culture, intelligence, but one thing that humans and animals do share is this connection to God. So I just see this as a bit contradictory that humans can lack all these traits that you would value humans for, but like the only thing that humans, like in this circumstance, might have is a connection to God. But you also say that animals have a connection to God. So there's no difference between, like, I don't see any meaningful difference between a comparable human and a comparable animal, but you'd be okay with killing and eating the animal, but not killing and eating the human. That seems like a contradiction to me.
Why would I want to kill a human?
I know. There's not really any reason, but my point is I don't see any reason for why you'd want to kill and eat an animal.
Because I'm hungry.
Yeah, okay, so that would be contradictory. Again, if we trait equalize, well, we've already trait equalized the human and the animal to where, okay, the human completely lacks culture, intelligence, only has a connection to God. The animal lacks intelligence, culture, but has a connection to God. The only difference here is genetics, but we've already kind of solved the problem. We've already sort of sorted out that problem that you don't really care about genetics. So if they're trait equalized, but you treat them completely differently, that seems like a contradiction to me.
Okay, well, I think that's fair. Now, one thing that we did point out is that this hypothetical human is born of another human being. This means that they are part of the human community. An animal is not, particularly a herd animal, or particularly an animal on a farm that is specifically farmed for the purpose of eating its meat. These are not the same thing, and I'm confused as to how you could equate them. And this is something that actually kind of always bothered me about a lot of like PETA ads. Like there was this one with like a pig on a barbecue stick on a roast, and it said he died for our sins. Like, to me, that's insane. And frankly, I think that when you treat animals that do not understand people in general, like my loving dog here, as though they are humans, that's also insane. The reason it's insane is because they're not human. I think that we're playing, I hate to say this, but we've gone through some hypotheticals and some, theoreticals and some very extreme cases to try to equate you and the dog behind you. And they're not the same thing.
Okay, so you mentioned in this trait equalization scenario, a human that lacks intelligence and culture, they're still part of the human community.
They're still human.
That community has to do with socialization, and you could be thrown out of a community or rejected from a community or never being a part of the community, like in the case of a feral child. Like there have been kids who are born from parents who are living out in the middle of the wilderness. Parents died, and the kids were saved by like wolves. So they're not part of a human community. Just like rights, community is something that's kind of granted to you. So again, I see this leading to a contradiction. If we trait equalize the human and the animal, you'd be okay with killing and eating the animal, but you wouldn't be okay with killing and eating the human. That's a contradiction.
Well,
So
part of the problem
either
is that we keep talking about trade equalization, and I'm not sure that that's actually a proper way to proceed. If trade equalization can make you and your dog appear equal in the eyes of the law, something is seriously wrong. And I'm not saying that something is seriously wrong with the end result, but something seriously wrong with how we got there. You appear to be a 20-something YouTuber
32.
who does 32. Okay, 30-something YouTuber who is talking at length about veganism and working out. Your dog is not. Your dog is your pet, and the point is, you're not the same thing. And I know that it sounds like I'm kind of just skipping over very well-crafted intellectual arguments, but if those arguments lead to you thinking that you're the same as your dog, something is seriously wrong.
Yeah, I'm not the same as my dog. Yeah, my dog's less intelligent. He's probably a bit cuter. Things like that. But
He also can't work out. He probably is not a workout.
well, yeah, he can't lift weights the same as me. I can bench more than him.
Can he
Sure. No, he can't speak. But
Can he bark?
again, yeah, he can. But
So-
these differences to me seem like just not substantial enough for me to be okay with killing and eating my dog.
Well, yeah. But now here's my question. Why do you feel it's okay to keep your dog in your house?
Well, because I love my dog and it's a domesticated animal and he cannot live outside without dying. Like he'd get eaten by coyotes or starve or something like that.
And now the cat. Also the same thing.
Same with the cat.
Yep.
Yeah, same with the cat.
What does the cat eat?
He eats a vegan diet. We feed him Benevo, vegan cat food.
Can I ask a question? Are cats naturally vegetarian?
No, they're naturally carnivorous, but
So why would you feed your cat a vegetarian diet?
Yeah, because I'm against killing animals. So if I have a cat, I'm obviously...
I mean, they're in a can.
Sorry?
The animals are already dead in a can. We're not talking about sending them off to kill mice here. They're in a can. You just have to just give the can to the cat.
Yeah, but an animal had to be killed in order to do that. So if I pay for, non-vegan cat food, I'm paying for animals to be killed.
If there were mice in your house, can the cat kill the mice?
Depends on the degree of infestation. If it's just one mouse, then yeah, I'd try to prevent the cat from eating the mouse. If it's like a crazy infestation where the only possible way is to use lethal force to end the infestation, then yeah, I'd be fine with it.
Okay, so basically it's just a matter of how bad the house gets before the cat. So this is kind of utilitarian sort of thinking in terms
No, it's not utilitarian.
When can we weaponize the cat is my question.
It's not a utilitarian worldview. I would say it's deontological. Like, let's say somebody broke into your house. Would you, if it were possible to remove that person from your house without using lethal force, would you not prefer that over using lethal force?
Not sure. If we're being honest, I'm not sure. While I'm clergy and therefore I cannot fight, I cannot use weapons. My family can, and I make sure they're armed to the teeth.
Right, but
the question is this: if I was to remove somebody who was trying to break into my house violently without lethal force, why would I want to risk them coming back?
Okay, well, you just call the police or something.
I don't
again, I don't know why you would just necessarily assume that because somebody broke in, they're gonna come back. Like, in all likelihood, they're not.
The way I see it is an active threat to my home. It is an active threat to my family.
Okay,
do you have kids?
No.
If you did, that changes your worldview substantially because if they can hurt your kids.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be something I'd consider if somebody did break in and the extent to what the threat is. But, let's say somebody just wanted to steal something valuable from your home. Let's say you had jewelry. They didn't really want to hurt you.
Jewelry, however, is usually in the bedrooms of a home, which means
sure.
they would have to confront you physically unless no one was home.
Let's say they just wanted to steal valuables from your home in general. Okay, they didn't want to hurt you, and maybe they even said that when you're pointing a gun at them. would it not be a better scenario to wait for the police to show up, hold them at gunpoint, and then have them be arrested versus just shooting them?
I mean, there's some pretty corrupt police departments out there.
Okay, but
I guess in theory, I'll accept that a little bit.
Right. Well, it's a similar thing. Like, okay, a mouse might want to come into my home to get food, like crackers or something. I do have crackers on the counter. If I can just pick up the mouse, put him outside, and then maybe figure out a way for mice to not get back in, I see that as a better alternative versus just killing whatever mice enter my home.
Well, you're not doing it. The cat is.
Well, yeah, the cat is, but again, I see that as a better alternative than letting my cat kill it. But
do you think your cat agrees? I mean, cats love killing. Do you think your cat agrees? I mean, cats love killing.
Well, I don't care. Like, maybe a person loves killing another human being. I don't really care if my cat loves killing mice.
Well, cats aren't killing other cats. They're killing mice. They're household pests. That's more comparable to you killing the mice. But the point is, the cat clearly does not share your opinion. It's like that video. It's like that video I heard of with there was like this thing where like they were showing like this dog that was eating vegan dog food. They put a steak in front of it for comparison. The dog just went for the steak. I mean, dogs are omnivores, but they do like meat, and cats are carnivores, so they really, really like meat, especially fresh meat. My question is, why are there so many constructions in this system that are not natural to these animals that you purportedly love? Like, they don't sound like they can't be happy.
No, they're happy.
I don't know. I mean, eating vegan cat food, I mean, that'd be pretty sad.
Finn.
Okay, well, look at that.
Does this dog look unhappy? He eats vegan.
Does he look unhappy?
He doesn't know. It's like the Impossible Burger.
Yeah. None of them are unhappy.
But if you give them a steak, they'd be even more happy.
Well, if I gave them a donut, I think they'd be even happier. But I know that's not in their best interest.
Okay, well, but meat. This dude likes meat. The point is that, yeah, I think what we're getting at here, what I'm trying to get at here, is that at least, and this is I really realize it's kind of a sidebar to what we've been talking about, but literally, when we're taking care of animals, what is the best way to take care of them? And I can't see veganism as a solution, especially for carnivorous animals. It seems like it's more for the entertainment of the person than for the actual animal's welfare.
Well, if we have a concern with animal welfare, there's other animals that exist besides our cats and dogs, and the animals that are being fed to our cats and dogs, I think we should be concerned for their welfare.
Why?
So, what can you name a trait that's lacking in a cow that, if lacking in a dog, would make it okay to kill and eat dogs or feed them to other animals?
Okay, so what you're asking me now is to compare cows and dogs. Now, cows being barnyard animals that produce a surplus of milk that cannot be usually fed to calves unless it's fresh.
By the way, the only reason they produce a surplus of milk is because we either give them hormones or we've selectively bred them to produce a surplus.
That's actually not true. We've been milking cows for centuries, and these hormones are less than 20 years old. So no, that's incorrect. But more importantly, they eat grass.
They've been selectively bred as well.
Well, so we could argue that. We could argue on the question of selective breeding. To me, it's not relevant. The idea that cows suddenly were selected. I mean, we're talking about. I hate to say this, but animal technology that's 4,000 or 5,000 years old.
Yep.
So it's
that's
kind of silly that we're going to go into this argument that they've been selectively bred that way, when we know that wild bovines also have milk surpluses.
I don't think there's any wild cows. I'm pretty sure they don't exist. Even if you go to Africa, they've actually all been domesticated as well.
Okay. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I'm pretty sure there are wild bovines, but I can double check that. Actually.
Yeah, they might have turned feral, but as far as I understand, all cows have actually been domesticated across the entire planet. So there might be some cows living feral, but they actually originate from selectively bred animals.
Even the term feral implies that they have a certain status when, in fact, a feral cat is almost as dangerous as its wild counterpart. This is also true with dogs that turn feral. Effectively, yeah, sure, they might be bred smaller, but they're still quite dangerous, much more dangerous than domesticated creatures. It's when we start talking about the feral nature of animals, we're talking about wild animals. I think we can agree there. So,
well, it's a bit semantic, but they originated from a domesticated species, so they are different from their original wild counterpart.
What did the domesticated species originate from?
Well, they originated from a wild animal, but like again, they were selectively bred and their genetics have been changed. And that happens within a very like you can alter the genetics and the appearance and the physical characteristics of an animal through selective breeding within only a few generations. So
I'm aware.
But yeah, the point I'm making is if you think it's like wrong for me to feed my cat a vegan diet, and we should be concerned with animal welfare, the animals that we're feeding to these animals, I think we should also be concerned with their welfare. And I don't see a meaningful difference between a cat, a dog, and say a cow, chicken, or pig.
Well, okay, now we've mentioned breeding here. You have domesticated animals at home. Those are bred, correct?
Yeah, but they're rescues. I didn't buy them from a breeder.
Okay. That's fair. Much respect for that. What were the cows bred for?
Yeah, they were bred for either meat or milk.
Okay, so they were bred for food.
Yes, but I'm against that.
But that's what they were bred for.
Yeah, correct. And if we bred dogs for food, would you be okay with killing eating dogs?
They do that in China.
Right. So are you okay with that?
I mean, I'm not okay or not okay with it. I wouldn't personally do it. I cannot imagine that. I've heard a dog sausage tastes okay. I have heard that, and apparently in the post-Soviet period, people did often use dogs to make sausage in factories. And frankly, with all the spices, you can't really tell much of a difference once it's generically shredded meat. Does it mean that I would use the dog as a food source? Not unless I was absolutely desperate. The dog is very useful. My dog, it's a Yorkie poo. It's capable of killing mice, and it's a very good noise alarm and has a lot of other purposes. And she's a great little dog. But the point is, if it came down to it, and my kids were starving, and all we had was the dog, yeah, I'd go with the dog.
Right, but we're not talking about a situation where your child is starving and you have to like value one or the other. We're talking about an option to either feed a dog a vegan diet or feed a dog another animal. And if we're concerned with animal welfare, isn't the best animal welfare scenario to feed a dog a vegan diet if the dog can be just fine on a vegan diet? And
dogs are natural hunters. They're descended from wolves.
Sure.
Wolves eat meat.
But if we can feed a dog
for their stomachs, but mostly they eat meat.
Right. So if we can feed a dog a vegan diet and they do just fine, and these other animals don't have to be killed, isn't that the most ideal animal welfare scenario?
Again, now this is assuming a lot. And what I mean by that is because even among humans, vegan diets are often notoriously incomplete. There are often nutritional structures that aren't kept, supplementation side effects because it's not the complete protein, etc. So if we can't even do human veganism right, why are we doing that to animals?
Well, vegans on average have lower risk of chronic disease, lower rates of obesity, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and they tend to live longer.
I've heard the list, but the problem is that if we're gonna go with that, then ultimately we have to deal with the fact that vegans chronically are usually missing vitamins B12, B2, D, niacin, iron, iodine, zinc.
Not true.
No, it is true. That's why you mentioned multivitamins, because of the fact that a lot of these are animal products.
Yeah,
B12 is in an animal product. Omega-3s are a fish protein. There's no way around this without. I know that you have the nutritional yeast. Well, what gives you the right to kill the yeast? I mean, the point is that it's if we're gonna play that game. I mean, that's also a living creature. But
right, I don't value non-sentient beings.
Oh, no, not this argument. I actually heard this in the chat beforehand. The argument, some vegan guy, Vegan Supreme or something, I don't know what his name was, but it was vegan.
Oh, I think he froze. I can't hear anything.
No, you're good, vegan. You're good. Joseph.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
I'm back.
Okay,
Sorry.
so we lost about 15 seconds.
Right. What I was saying was that the person I was talking to was mentioning bivalves, and bivalves, as you know, mollusks, clams and stuff. He was saying their thought processes barely exist. Like that's, I think he said Vegan Gains would agree with me that those could be eaten, and then you get your proteins and your B12 and veganism once you're eating shell.
Okay,
Joseph, you're actually breaking up quite a bit now. You might want to reboot or hop out of StreamYard and then come back in, because you are breaking up quite badly. Haven't had any problems until just right this second, so it's likely that you're either running too many programs in the background or your camera started to get a little hot.
maybe his god is disagreeing with his arguments and is trying to end this. It's clearly divine intervention.
It's not fair, vegan, because if you're gonna try, I can't even say anything back because I'm the moderator. It's messed up. Hey, there you go. Looks good on this end. Let me get rid of this second
there's
view.
two of me.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, what I was saying,
you're talking about bivalves, and then you cut off.
Right, I was saying that apparently the argument was that bivalves, because of their limited sensory applications, etc., their limited understanding, are perfectly valid to eat. But my point was that's not vegan anymore. You're eating shellfish. It literally goes against the concept that the vegan society. Well, then you're not really a vegan.
No,
look, I'm all for it. You eating mussels and stuff. It's just that's not vegan. I don't think.
Well, I don't eat them personally, but
like you could though. You're saying it's okay, and it's
well,
still he was saying it was still vegan, which it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so the vegan society definition, I don't agree with. I think their definition is reducing the suffering, death, exploitation of animals as much as reasonably possible. That's their definition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree.
Are animals, though.
Yeah, I don't agree with that definition. And if we're gonna have the most charitable interpretation of that definition, I think it's assumed that they're talking about sentient animals, not non-sentient animals. But I don't follow their definition. The definition I follow is one that I created, which is veganism is a logical extension of human rights.
Okay, but now I have a question, because you mentioned sentient animals. Can you define that a little bit for me?
Yeah, so sentience is the ability to have a subjective experience.
Do fish have sentience?
Yeah, they can have a subjective experience.
Like what?
Like pain. It's pretty clear they can feel pain.
I've read otherwise, that fish actually have difficulty feeling pain if it's not common. Okay, so then basically we're talking, so a grasshopper has feelings, correct?
In all likelihood, so like again, we have to we can't even know for sure if other minds exist out of our minds, but we're going outside of that assumption. So like we have to make a few assumptions about reality to talk about this, but I think we can kind of skip past some of the more meta philosophical stuff. But yeah, in all likelihood, I mean, they do have very primitive brains, but they do have things like eyes they can probably see,
Well, the reason I ask, and again, I personally find this practice somewhat abhorrent, but like take for example in Japan, there's a common popular trend of eating octopi live.
Yeah, well, octopi are highly sentient. They have very complex brains. They have eyes. They have a nervous system. They can clearly feel pain.
Okay. How do you know?
Well, again, outside of solipsism, like all the methods we use to determine whether or not something's sentient, it's apparent in octopi. Like, again, they have a brain, they have a nervous system, they have nociceptors, they have what some researchers consider language. It might be a very primitive language, but they do have language, it seems. They can communicate with others. They can actually communicate with humans to some extent. Octopi have been seen leading humans to food and using humans to get food. They can communicate with other fish to help so that they can have a beneficial sort of relationship where they can better hunt together. So, like, all of the methods that we use to determine whether or not something's sentient, that's apparent in octopi. Like, the only way you could say like an octopi isn't sentient is if you like take the viewpoint of solipsism, where we can't know another mind and you just deny the existence of other minds.
Okay, so basically you're saying octopi then definitely are sentient.
Yeah.
Lobsters.
Yeah, there was a paper released recently that argued that lobsters are probably sentient. Again, they don't technically have a brain. What they have is a very complex collection of nerve ganglion, which is essentially a very primitive evolutionary step towards a brain. And they have nerve ganglion collections within each limb. So they don't have like a centralized brain. They don't have a centralized brain, but they have like a collection of nerve ganglion around where their brain kind of you'd expect it to be. They have nerve ganglion around their claws, their tail, stuff like that. But again, they do have eyes. They seem to react to stimuli in a fairly intelligent way. They seem to display pain. So the propensity of evidence seems to suggest that they're sentient.
Even though they don't have a brain.
Yeah, again, they have what would be considered an evolutionary step towards a brain.
It's still not a brain. It's just nerves.
Yeah.
Okay.
For nerve ganglion.
All right. So the lobster is somehow sentient, even though he has no brain. Got it.
They could be.
So,
but again, the propensity of evidence seems to suggest that they likely are. They're more likely to be sentient than non-sentient. And I would just use the precautionary principle of, I'd rather not risk committing harm.
How do you feel now? I assume you're against abortion then as well.
I'm against abortion when the fetus is sentient, but pre-sentience, I'm fine with abortion.
Pre-sentience. Let me see if I understand correctly. You're giving the benefit of a doubt to a lobster, but not to a human.
Yeah, so there's I think we can both agree at the moment of conception, a fetus, if you could call it that, is non-sentient.
It's a baby.
Like they're two cells.
Call it a baby.
Well, we're talking about the moment of conception. Is it or is it not sentient?
To me, sentience is not a standard to adhere to. So yeah, I would say no, it's not sentient, but that doesn't matter. It's still a human.
Okay, so you would consider a single cell with the male and female gametes connected to each other to make a unique genetic profile. That is a human being?
Yeah, in its earliest form.
Okay, so again, this is kind of strange to me because you're in favor of protecting a single-celled organism, but you're not in favor of protecting something like a dog from getting eaten for meat?
Well, I mean, I could flip that right back around on you, and I would say that it strikes me as odd that you wouldn't defend a human that is single-celled, but you would defend a lobster that has no brain.
Yeah, but again, the assumption is the lobster is likely sentient, whereas I know for sure, and even you admitted, there's no way a single-celled human is sentient.
But I know a single-celled human will eventually be sentient if it's taken care of and not killed.
Right, but if you can control the outcome, it won't be.
In other words, if you kill it, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you can kill the human, but you shouldn't kill a lobster, even though it has no brain. I'm just trying to understand you.
Yeah. So the human isn't sentient. I don't have a problem with killing a non-sentient creature.
Can you see why I might start thinking that veganism's a little misanthropic?
Well, again, you're the one who's fine with like killing and eating dogs.
I'm not
If
fine
you
with
think
it. I would not personally do it, but the point is, I know it can be done.
right, but
But you're
like
okay with
if we're
ripping apart
talking
little
about
kids, so it's fine.
like I'm not in favor of ripping apart little kids. We're talking about a single-celled organism.
It's not single celled for longer than 24 hours. By the time you discover it is far from single celled. Most pregnancy tests pick that up around 8 weeks. If at the earliest, it's usually around 11. By around week 13, it has fully formed limbs. So yes, you are tearing apart a baby.
Yeah, again, if we look at the number of different conscious creatures we're in favor of killing, I think you're in favor of killing far more than I am.
Well, yeah, except I'm not in favor of killing humans.
Well, we've gone through the name the trait process, and the best answer you could give me is I don't know, because when we trait equalize, you gave me the answer I don't know. So maybe you would be okay with killing humans.
Well, if they're invading my house, I think that we've clarified that. That said, again, if it seems like I'm applying what would be known as the law of the jungle, it is because I do generally see things that way, which is how animals see that things, and that's why they kill each other, and that's why they eat each other, and that's why dogs normally would eat meat and cats universally eat meat, and humans saying they shouldn't doesn't make any sense to me.
Humans saying they shouldn't eat meat?
Yeah, because if that's what they're used to, I give the animals what they want. My dog and cat love that. They've never asked me for a vegan diet.
Okay, what if your cat and dog loved eating people?
Then they'd probably have to be put down. Those would be that would be a very
right.
large.
So you don't really care,
right?
So you don't really care about the laws of the jungle. This is about your own personal preferences, and my
What do you
personal
mean by the
preference is
personal
to
explain?
my personal preference is to not harm animals.
But harm humans.
No,
Like unborn
I
humans.
don't. So if we're going to talk about like what is human, I think we have different definitions.
We do, but clearly, in my definition, a human baby that's not born yet shouldn't be killed, and in your definition, it can be. So that is a very big difference.
Yeah, pre-sentience.
And on top of that, you're unwilling to kill certain animals, but still willing to kill a human being that has not interfered in your life or committed a crime because it hasn't even been physically born yet. I would say
it hasn't interfered with my life, but it might interfere with a woman's life, and if it's non-sentient, I don't see an issue.
Okay, so in other words, if it's okay to kill a human if it inconveniences a woman, is that my understanding?
If they're non-sentient.
Oh, if they're non-sentient. Okay. Now keep in mind, as I mentioned, by week 13, it would be very hard to argue that the baby is not sentient. At least if you're applying the same standard as a lobster. Am I correct?
Yeah. I think the earliest the earliest evidence we have that a fetus is sentient occurs around 8 weeks, where you see non-reflex neural activity. So that would suggest some sort of perception going on rather than it around 8 weeks. That's the earliest possible evidence. Like that's the earliest evidence we have right now that a fetus might have some degree of sentience. So again, and that's from non-reflex neural activity. So it's not from like poking them and then there's some like nerve signaling that happens and they might kick or something. It's neural activity that doesn't have to do with a reflex. So it's possible that they're sentient at 8 weeks. The best evidence that I would say that a fetus is sentient is around 12 weeks.
That's impressive. To understand correctly, you're saying that a human being probably does not have sentience until the second trimester.
Between 8 and 12 weeks.
While at the same time ascribing sentience to a lobster. I just want to, I'm going to hammer this because I really, really want you to visualize what you are saying. I want you to visualize a lobster in a tank, and I want you to visualize a fetus at week 12, but picture it. It is a human fetus that is growing and becoming a full-size baby. That's what they do.
Well,
in your worldview, that lobster has sentience and that human does not.
yeah, so I think sentience arises somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks. Like, again, to be fair, you're even against aborting a single-celled organism, so like right at
Because
the
it's a
moment of
human. Yeah,
conception.
I don't want the human to die.
Right.
Correct.
So like a single cell versus a lobster. So like a literal circle versus a lobster. Yeah, I'm
That
gonna
literal
value the
circle
lobster a
is
bit
going to
more.
become a human in 9 months, a full-fledged walking around arguing.
Well,
Maybe they'll even become a vegan. Who knows? But the point is that they're still a human, whereas that lobster is just a lobster.
yeah. Again, I think we just have a fundamental difference in values here. Where again, I only value sentience, whereas you don't. You value a combination of other things, but
I
I think
value
your
humanity.
values. Yeah, well, I don't know, because when we did the trait equalization thing a while ago, and I asked you if you'd be okay with killing and eating a human, your answer was I don't know.
No,
So I don't
didn't
know
say
if you
that.
value
I
humanity.
do not. I did not. When did I say that I would eat a human? I never said that.
You said I don't know.
Then
So
I
I don't know if you
misunderstood your
value
question.
humanity, and I don't know if you know if you value humanity.
I can definitely answer that question. It may have been confused in the discussion, but no, I would not eat a human.
Right. So to go back to the name the trait issue then, so if there was a human that lacked culture, that lacked intelligence, but only had a connection to God, just like the animals.
I would argue there's a potentiality issue that you're ignoring, but that's beside the point.
Right, but you would be okay with killing and eating the animal, but you wouldn't be okay with killing and eating the human, even if they were trait equalized, right?
Because I think your trait equalization methods is insufficient for determining whether things are similar or different. In the same, using again, using this trait assimilation method, one could make an argument for the rights of your dog.
Yeah,
Which I'm
and
sure you had, right.
I
But
think
the
my
reality
dog
is
should have rights.
right. But the reality is your dog doesn't have rights. Your dog's a dog. He's not you. That's just reality. I know that, we can point to he's a loving
Hang on,
creature.
gentlemen. I'm sorry to cut in, but that is actually all the time we have for this portion of the debate. There's no great time to end a debate, right? There just never is.
Sure.
But so this is as good a time as any. I do want to give both of you guys closing arguments before we move over to the call-in section. Now, Vegan Gains, as Joseph opened first, I'm going to let you close first so he has the last word. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, sure. So, again, I believe my worldview leads to no contradictions. You might disagree with my worldview that I value sentience and sentient creatures should be protected under the law, but I think his worldview, Joseph's worldview, does lead to contradictions where even if we don't see any meaningful dissimilarities between humans and animals, he would still be in favor of only killing the animal but not killing the human, even when, again, according to him, there's no meaningful dissimilarities. So that's a contradiction, and either he has to acknowledge that he's in favor of taking away human rights, or he is in favor of granting rights to animals. Since he's not willing to acknowledge the contradiction, I think he's just being unreasonable, in my opinion, and I think a lot of his viewpoints are unreasonable. He believes it's okay to kill and eat dogs, which is something I'm totally against, and I think a lot of people are against. Showed you my little dog Finn on stream. I think it would be horrible to kill a cute little dog like Finn, or any dog for that matter. And I think a lot of animals, including chickens, cows, pigs that we eat, they're sweet, sentient, intelligent, curious animals that can feel love and affection just like we can. And they should be protected just like your dogs or cats, and just like you or me. So that's my ending statement.
Understood. Thank you so much for that closing statement, Vegan Gains. Moving over to you, Joseph, whenever you're ready.
I think I kind of pointed out at the beginning of this debate, and there's a reason I threw out the dead vegan influencer, as well as the baby who died because she was fed almond milk. And I think this debate helped confirm things, confirm pretty much some of my suspicions. As pleasant as it was to talk to Vegan Gains, the simple reality is that when we take away the concept of rights, because I don't believe that those exist without enforcement mechanisms, there's no real good reason to believe in the concept of animal rights. But more importantly, that ultimately veganism, for some reason, seems much more anti-human than pro-animal. We find this, we had this discussion. Ultimately, Vegan Gains is kind of, I'd say he's a middle of that kind of, he takes the middle of the road democratic position that babies are usually, as long as it's to a certain period, that's it's okay to kill them. He puts it as this nebulous notion of sentience, which apparently doesn't apply to a small child, even though it applies to a lobster without a brain. That said, again, I'm not surprised. I'm a little sad. I thought the theoretical question of the alien was kind of pointless. I do not like the idea that dogs are eaten, but I am not against their being eaten in case of that situation. Do I like what's going on in China? No, but I don't feel guilty about it. It's not me. I have a cute little dog, and I'm not going to torture her by feeding her vegan dog food. I have a cat. A cat's a carnivore, and I'm not going to play house with the cat and force the cat to eat something it doesn't naturally eat. There is something to be said for just nature in this, and it's, I think, largely been forgotten, misplaced in this weird constructed modernist world. And from that perspective, I think I'll say thanks and we'll leave it at that.
Appreciate that closing statement. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, you can still send in a super chat. We'll be getting to all those tonight. We have some callers who are coming in, but before we do things a little bit differently on the Crucible. Once the closing statements are done, we do consider this portion of the debate to be closed. Moderator usually takes notes throughout the debate and can ask some questions at this point. And I have a couple that I want to ask. In this case, just one for each debater. With Vegan Gains, there'll probably be one follow-up with this, depending on your answer. But you claimed that a human presentience has no moral value. So essentially killing it is fine. That's correct, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. But eggs also have no sentience. Can we eat them? Chicken eggs?
So eggs don't have any sentience, but there's an issue with the industry of egg-laying hens, and it's the egg-laying hens that I have an issue when it comes to mistreatment, not the eating of eggs itself.
So you would say that the eggs themselves and the eating of the eggs contribute to the kind of like bad or mistreatment or bad thing that's happening to the hens, correct?
Yeah, so if you're buying unfertilized eggs, you're paying for the mistreatment of the hens. But if you were to find an unfertilized egg just somewhere, eating that unfertilized egg isn't harming anybody.
But how come that criticism does not apply to you for abortion? If you're killing them pre-sentience, doesn't it support an industry that kills them post-sentience?
Well, no. If you're
No.
so if you're just paying for an abortion pre-sentience, I don't see how that's necessarily supporting.
How would it not? How could it possibly not be contributing towards the bills and the payment and the everything else, which would go into the abortion of children who do fit your definition of sentience?
Yeah, so there's different doctors that are going to be comfortable with abortion at different periods. There are doctors who will refuse to perform an abortion at 12 weeks. There's some that will refuse at 6 months. So it's not really supporting an industry of aborting fetuses at a later date. It's entirely due to whatever the whatever the morals of whatever doctor or clinic you're going to. Especially if you're talking about a socialized,
that did abortions from, as early as whenever it's detectable, pre-sentience, all the way up to 9 months. If they were aborting the children who were pre-sentience, you couldn't possibly make an argument that that was not contributing to the killing of children post when you consider sentience.
Yeah, I still don't think so, because there are abortions that you would consider ethical. So there are, like, say, children that die in the womb, and then you'd need an abortion in that circumstance, or else the mother would die. So would you be in favor of the mother just dying of a severe infection?
Yeah, I don't, but I'm not
because-
sure.
That's
I'm not sure how that
is-
answers the question, though.
Yeah.
Even if I was, for instance, for that, it's still and even if they were doing the right thing by doing those abortions, let's just say that they were, I still don't understand how it could be possible that if it was pre-sentience, so you have no problem
Okay,
now.
I understand what you mean.
Yeah,
Okay, I understand what you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah. So these are all personal choices. So like the dissimilarity between the egg industry and the abortion industry is that when you pay for eggs, you're harming another person, like in this case, an egg-laying hen, and you're not like you buying those eggs. It's not it's creating the same set of circumstances no matter who's buying them. Whereas if you go in for an abortion and the abortion is ethical, and like in the case of, say, the fetus dies in the womb, and if the fetus isn't aborted, the mother's going to die, you're not creating the same set of circumstances that where a child is dying or a child is being killed, like a sentient child. So
question.
yeah,
Have you ever raised chickens?
no.
Okay, just a little thing. When you raise chickens, they can't count. So you see, when you take the eggs, as long as you leave one, the chicken doesn't count.
I don't think you understand what I'm saying.
I don't. I'm trying to understand what's the moral. You said taking from another person.
I actually do.
It's not. So if you watch the animal rights documentary Dominion, there's a section where they talk about the egg laying industry. If you want to know more in detail, you should watch that documentary. I
actually do understand the criticism, and I've worked most of my professional career inside of giant factories which process meat and kill animals. I understand the process well, and I understand the criticism of saying that by going to the store and buying the eggs at the store that come from these kind of mass giant plants, that you are contributing towards the kind of mistreatment of these animals. That is the criticism. I just don't understand how that criticism would not be applied back to you in the case of abortion, pre-sentience versus post when you consider it sentience. It's the exact same process.
Yeah. So when I just consider this healthcare, and let's say if you're dealing with an abortion clinic that aborts anywhere from 8 weeks to 6 months, if you're getting an abortion at 8 weeks, you're not contributing to a system that kills children. You're just getting healthcare for yourself. So this is just a set of personal choices that people are making.
Well, if you're buying the egg, you're not technically going and harming the chicken yourself.
Well, you're paying for the abuse,
right? But that would be the same thing if you consider at some point
you're paying for the service
doesn't
to get an ethical abortion.
Okay, let me ask this then. Maybe I'm confused on this point. What point do you think the child has sentience inside the womb and it's no longer okay to kill them?
It's somewhere between 8 to 12 weeks.
You think so? So like maximum charitable, let's give you 12 weeks. You would consider anything post 12 weeks to be murder.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's true, and you had a clinic that did them from every which way, and let's say the more popular one was below that sentience line, it still would be funding all the abortions that were moving past that sentience line. The criticism is just as equatable to you as it would be for us.
I don't see how you're funding.
Well, the clinic's making money, right? And
they're
paying their
money,
staff, and they're paying their light bill, and they're paying for their equipment. They're paying for all of this.
But so even if we acknowledge that, I don't think you should literally have to kill yourself just because other people are doing something.
Well, let's say it's not life-threatening.
Okay.
Which is most cases, right? Most cases aren't life-threatening. So it's not life-threatening.
Yeah.
But you are still contributing to all of those abortions that happen, which are not life-threatening, which are past the point of sentience. How could you possibly not equate the same? Criticism?
So you can't control what other people are doing. So you can only control what you're doing. So if you're going to get an abortion, say at pre 8 weeks, where I would consider it an ethical abortion. I don't see you doing anything wrong. If somebody wants to do an abortion after 12 weeks, they're the ones doing something wrong. And I don't see how you're contributing to their personal choice.
Because if you go to a clinic to have it done, that does kill the children after this point of sentience, because let's say it's lawful to do so.
Yeah.
You would be then using your
The
wallet
issue,
to contribute the same way you would as buying the
no.
eggs, right?
No, the issue would be that it's legal to do so. Not that.
Well, it's legal to buy eggs, but you're still morally opposed to it.
Yeah, right. But you are but you're literally paying for the abuse. That's my point.
Yeah, but you'd be
You're not
doing the
paying-
same thing.
You're not paying for someone else's abortion. You're paying for your abortion.
You're subsidizing the clinic.
Right.
Just
Just
it's
like
not
you're subsidizing the
clinic,
meat packing.
It's paying for the service.
Like if nobody bought the eggs, the meat plant couldn't have the equipment, they couldn't have the staff, they couldn't do any of those things to harm those chickens because nobody's buying the eggs. It'd be the same way in this case if the clinic did far more of those pre-abortions than the post-sentience abortions. Wouldn't you be morally obligated to be against that?
Okay, well, are you against factory farming?
Me? No.
No. Okay.
No.
What about Joseph? Are you against like factory farming, abusing animals?
To some degree, actually, I am. I actually consider. I go for like free range and organic chickens.
Okay.
I do my part. That's not,
Sure.
if I can.
Okay, so yeah, let's say Tyson Farms. Let's say they had factory farms, and let's say they also had like organic free range farms. And
they do. They have both.
Yeah,
Tyson Foods.
Yeah, I know. Let's say you only bought from the organic free range farms. Are you contributing to the factory farming by doing that? Or are you putting your dollar in supporting ethical farming?
Well, it depends on whether or not you're talking about if there's another free range farm that doesn't have to be Tyson. Ultimately, if you're choosing Tyson, you're choosing the best you can from Tyson, but you are making kind of that deal with the devil because you are partially supporting the factory farm. I personally am a big fan of hyperlocalism. I like dealing with family farms whenever it's possible. I think that people should do that. I think soon people won't have much of a choice. But that doesn't change the reality that if something your funding is half bad, that you're still funding it. And that's ultimately the point.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, from my perspective, you're not funding unethical abortions by getting an ethical abortion. The issue to me would be legislation and regulation, because you choosing personally not to get an abortion, I don't see that preventing any other abortions.
You're still contributing to the system, though.
Well, like, again, you're not causing any more further abortions. The issue is legislation and regulation. And especially when you're talking about Canada, where all of this is socialized, you're in no way going to, and most healthcare systems are socialized. It's just the states. That's
but within the confines of the hypothetical, wouldn't it be basically impossible for you not to say that you would be against the practice then of ever going to that abortion clinic if
no? Again, I don't see how you personally choosing not to, like, unless you could show me evidence that if somebody chose to not get an abortion at pre 8 weeks, let's say, that would actually prevent a abortion that's not ethical. I don't see.
It would be the same evidence as buying the eggs contributes to the hens having to lay the eggs. You're
because
funding it, right?
Abuse is, you're literally paying for the abuse. You're not paying for the abuse when you get an ethical abortion.
You would be paying for the unethical. You'd be paying for or subsidizing the unethical abortion. So you're still subsidizing that the same way you would be with the factory farm. So if you go in, because you have a standard for when sentience occurs, so you agree it's murder at X point. If that's true, anybody goes to that clinic to have those abortions past X point is being subsidized by the people who are having the ethical ones in your world. I don't see how that can't be. I mean, just follow, doesn't it?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure something like 80% of abortions are pre 13 weeks.
That's right. They are. So then they are subsidizing all of the ones
Well,
are
you're only
past
talking
that.
about 20%. Reducing abortions by 20% isn't going to.
Well,
That's not going
wait
to
a
do
second.
anything.
What you're talking about is a moral standard. So you're saying that 80% of the abortions are done pre your moral standard and 20% are not, which means all those people who are getting them done within what is the moral standard are subsidizing the 20% who aren't, or these abortion clinics couldn't exist.
Well, so you're saying if 80% of the people didn't get the. Well,
then how many lives
it's-
would you save?
Well, I don't know if
20%?
it would.
20%?
I don't know if you would, because there'd still be those 20% other abortions. Like, I don't know how many abortion clinics would be completely inaccessible.
Well, if it's
But I'm not sure.
if it's 1 million abortions a year, let's say, then that's 200,000 actual human beings' lives you would be saving.
Well, again, I'd need to see evidence that if we were to reduce abortions by, say, 80%, those other 20% wouldn't happen.
Well, I mean, surely you would agree that the massive amount of funding for the abortion clinics, if it was reduced by 80%, would be far less likely to
I don't
have
know.
the type of equipment
Like,
and the type of medical staff that's available. I mean, an 80% reduction in funding?
well, I don't know. There are rare diseases that are treated all the time, so I don't know.
Okay. I appreciate it. That kind of got into more of a spar than I want, but I
Yeah.
enjoyed it very much. Thank you for humoring me with the questions, Joseph. I'm not going to be any easier on you.
I have a feeling, no.
So I felt like you were pretty much avoiding this question a bit with Vegan Gains hypothetical, and it really is a legitimate criticism from the vegan side, which is why I wanted you to answer to it. So I've kind of
Sure.
crafted it in a slightly different way where maybe you can contend with it better.
Okay.
Assume that we had a cloning machine. A
Okay.
human being went inside, they got cloned, and a perfect duplicate of them walked out of the cloning machine. This is the
All
year 2500, okay?
Sure. Okay.
Is that a human being?
Yes.
That is that human being made in the image of God?
Yes.
How does that process work that a clone would be made in the image of God?
Because a clone shares genetic similarity to the original. It's like twins. They're both in the image of God.
So then if it's genetic, which is what Vegan Gains' point was, then there must be some genetic dissimilarity that you're going to point to as the distinction between the animal and the human as to why it is that you can't eat the animal, or you can't eat the human, but you can eat the animal.
Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately, I don't believe that animals are made in the image and likeness of God. I believe they're created by God. I believe they're beautiful. I believe they're wonderful, but they are not humans. And so
but it says just genetic then?
If we're going to be all rough and tumble about it, yeah, I guess I'd have to go with that. I'm not saying that I like
if it is, then what is the genetic distinction? What is this genetic distinction that you would attribute to an animal that a human doesn't have? They have a central nervous system. They have a brain. They have all of these kinds of same markers, right? Forget the lobster for a second. I don't care. Kill all the lobsters you want. But what about like a dog? What would be the distinction there that you would make on a genetic level and say, that's the thing I'm pointing to? That is the distinction.
I actually brought up dogs because they're subjective. The simple reality is that there is no objective marker. While I personally would not eat my dog and VG would not eat my dog across the world, there are people literally farming and eating dogs. The idea that it's, in other words, I don't have a personal stake in eating dogs. I love my dog and I wouldn't eat my dog, but I can't actually say that if someone in China is eating a dog, or Korea, or whichever country you choose, that it's morally wrong. I'm not in a position to judge them because I don't know how they treat dogs. What if the dogs are more vicious there? That's my argument for eating turkeys. Turkeys are nasty, violent creatures that attack humans on a regular basis. I think they should all be beheaded. I'm really okay with that. And the point
I'm just going to run to the bathroom real quick.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I understand. But the point is that, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. That,
but I mean, being made in the image of God can't just mean genetics. There must be something else that it means.
Well, it's the nature of the human being. When we talk about the image and likeness of God, what we're referring to is that he created us with a free will, with the ability to think. There's a lot of theological concepts.
He didn't create the clone. We created the clone.
Well, you didn't create the clone, because to create the clone, you would have had to create the genetics. You copied the genetics.
So, so then there is nothing more than the genetics. This is becoming circular.
Well, how is it? Okay, I'm confused.
So,
How is it circular?
so if there's this other distinction where you say we're created in the image and likeness of God, right? There's a process that's put in place, I'm assuming, for this to happen. If the process is removed and instead there's a perfect cloning machine and you just step through it and suddenly there's a duplicate of you.
No, it would be the genetic in that case, because that would imply that test tube babies aren't in the image and likeness of God. Of course they are.
But what if there was something else in the genetics which showed you could test and you knew they were a clone? So you knew that they weren't, there was some genetic distinction which happened so that you could actually make the test and say, okay, you're a clone. You're not a person who was born from a womb. Now there's a genetic distinction, but they have all of the other qualia. Could we eat that person then, or would they be a person? No, still not. No, so then there's got to be something more than genetics here.
Well, there is, and it's ultimately a theological discussion. It's about the nature of the soul. It's about the unique nature of human creation, that even were we to replicate it in some sort of weird way, without fundamentally and seriously distorting a person with, like, say, a chimera or something, which is stuff that they're working on now, that's still a person.
Okay.
I would even say some chimeras would still be people, like the dogmen.
I feel like that's somewhat inconsistent, to be honest with you, but I'll let it stand because, it is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it.
I mean, we can try the question again.
But I do want to move on to callers while we're waiting for them. I don't see any in the queue, which is odd because I know there was a bunch in the Discord who wanted to come in. Let me go ahead and we'll get through some of these super chats. Wicked Wally says, humanoids eat humans and don't care in fiction. Orcs eat humans in multiple fantasy settings. Yeah, that's a good point. They do, but they are considered immoral, right? Like orcs are the evil ones, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's like kind of the point. Borp for $2 says, if my aunt had balls. That's
a good one.
Okay. Back to the super chats. Eddier than thou for $20 says, keep up the good work, Andrew. Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it very much. Grow Greensland says, aliens, schmalians. Okay, fair enough. Aliens, schmalians. Petrogard says, VG, hypothetically, if your grandmother's mind was transferred into a block of tofu and the tofu's non-mind was transferred into your grandma, would you care if for tofu grandma while jelling pears? I don't know.
Yeah, so I if a sentient mind was in a block of tofu, I'd care for the block of tofu. So yeah.
Okay. Marshall Forward for $10 says, Crucible brings best content, bar none. Hey, I appreciate that very much. A lot of people really enjoyed this debate. I did too. Made by Jim Bob show sends in $5, says, VG, if I raise $500,000, would you sell your dog to me for a community feast?
No, my dog is priceless.
Gotcha. What if the dog only had one day to live? Would you sell it for $500,000 then?
I don't know if I'd feel comfortable about that. Like, he's a family member, and I feel like I'd be betraying him on his last day on Earth.
Raise it up to $1 million. I'll do it.
Yeah, do it for $1 million. Made by Jim Bob show for $5 says, VG, can fish form opinions and judgment about pain? If so, how did you determine that?
Yeah, so there's a fair bit of research on whether or not fish are sentient and can feel pain. Basically, they have all the structures required to feel pain, so they have a brain, nervous system, and nociception. And if you conduct experiments, so one of the experiments was injecting acid into their lips, which is where they have a very large nerve cluster. They will do things that you would expect if a fish had pain avoidance mechanisms and was feeling pain. So their heart rate increases. You see an increase in different neurotransmitters associated with pain. They'll rub their face and lips up against whatever glass tank they're in. So there's enough evidence to suggest they have pain, unless you're going to take, the position of solipsism that we can't know another mind. There's enough evidence clearly to suggest that fish feel pain.
Okay. Made by Jim Bob sends in another one and says, VG, when a rattlesnake strikes, is it making a choice? And if yes, why do headless snakes still strike in response to stimuli?
I don't know if headless snakes actually are still alive because they're cold-blooded. So their metabolism might be slow enough where even if they're headless for a while, they can still think and feel. So I'm not sure if headless snakes are making a conscious choice.
Okay.
I would assume, again, because they are sentient, they are making some kind of choice to strike.
They're headless.
AC, who's been a member for 2 months, appreciate that, says, do animals feel pain and die in nature? And can localized farming, in addition to hunting, replace industrial farming without evil food supply control? That's to either of you.
Yes.
Yeah, so animals do feel pain and die in nature, and I don't see a problem with industrialized agriculture necessarily. It kind of depends on how it's done. Obviously, I'm against industrialized animal agriculture. But I do think if we're going to have a population of 8 billion now, you probably do need industrialized agriculture. There's just better ways of doing it where you can maybe use less land, less greenhouse gas emissions, things like that.
Okay. This one comes in from Petrogard for $2. Says Sola Vigtura. Checkmate.
I don't know what that means.
He's making a sola scriptura reference, which is often a Catholic and Orthodox criticism against Protestantism. So it's like yeah. Well, now I explain the joke, so it's not even funny. But anyway, for $10, made by Jim Bob sends in. He says likelihood equals favorable outcome, unfavorable outcome. You need to observe the favorable outcome of lobsters being sentient before you establish likelihood. When have you observed the favorable outcome?
I don't really understand that question. It's a descriptive question whether or not lobsters are sentient. I don't know whether or not it's favorable or unfavorable.
Well, right. Well, that's what he's saying. To kind of formulate his question, what he's asking is, from the lobster's perspective, absent sentience, how can you tell what the favorable outcome for the lobster is without essentially making just an assumption that it's favorable to it?
I'm still not quite understanding. Like, if the lobster was sentient, me thinking it's sentient would be favorable to the lobster. Like, is that what he is?
No, what he's saying is this, that you would have to observe that there is some sort of outcome that indicates it could be sentient before you establish that there is a likelihood it's sentient. When have you actually observed this?
Oh, okay. I read a paper recently. It was pretty in depth, talking about the different evidences of sentience in crustaceans.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Marie Smithville sends in $5. Says VG has said he would not be morally opposed to the consumption of roadkill. Would he be morally opposed to the consumption of non-sentient abortion?
No. Not in a vacuum.
You need a person?
If they were non-sentient and I don't know, there weren't any external factors like the mother or father had a problem with it or something, in a vacuum, I don't see an issue.
Now, hang on, because while that's a criticism that is shocking, a question to you then, Swayden. This is an important one. You remember the movie? Did you ever see the movie Alive?
Yeah, I've heard about it.
Yeah, you remember? So that was based on a true story, where just like in the Donner Party, where they were starving and there was dead people, and they did eat the dead people in order to survive. They were judged very, very harshly for doing that. But I'm not so sure that in a similar situation, I would do something dissimilar, or you would, in order to, let's assume you had your children there or something like this. You knew rescue was coming, but they were starving. You may have to hold out for weeks until a storm blew over, something like this. Would you eat the dead body?
Would I eat it or would I become it? I'd rather, unless there was somebody already dead.
Somebody's already dead.
Honestly, in that sort of situation, as much as I would hate to admit it, I'd probably eat the a dead body.
Right.
There's
So
nothing
then
else, yeah.
that does allude to some type of morality there where we do consider a dead body while the consumption of it is seemingly morally abhorrent. We definitely don't consider it on par with eating something which is alive, like a
Well, I
human.
think there's a big difference between the consumption of a non-sentient abortion. Okay, he disappeared. It's just us now. I think there's a difference between the consumption of a non-sentient abortion and a body that's dead on an island and everyone's going to die. These are very different things, which is why I was surprised that he answered that so quickly.
Yeah, well, I mean, these are from a vegan standpoint, these are all very common criticisms, so I'm sure he's not particularly surprised by many of the arguments because he probably hears them often. And I do too, because I run a debate channel where we do a lot of vegan debates.
Well, this is another thing that confuses me, and I do want to ask this question, VG, while you're here. What's up with the cannibalism connection thing? I've noticed that there's sometimes almost a cannibalistic theme. There's vegetarian cannibalistic meals. I've seen references to vegan cannibalism. Usually they're sexual. And I'm curious as to why that is. Like, why there's no, it doesn't seem to me to make sense. It's almost like, well, you can't eat animals, so like eating people's okay. I don't get it.
Yeah, well, usually when cannibalism's brought up, people just ask it as a hypothetical of, okay, if somebody's already dead somehow, is there an ethical issue with eating them? And it's basically to test whether or not we care about sentience and not something else. And again, like I don't see in a vacuum, assuming you're not, say, offending the person's family somehow by eating the person, like I just don't, I can't think of anything for why it would be morally wrong.
Right. Well, from my perspective, there would be the problem of sacrilege, because you're defiling the dead body. But in an emergency, crazed situation, yeah, that's what.
I don't see anything wrong with like mutilating a corpse, like it's a corpse, unless like again you're offending the person's family somehow, something like that.
I would say it's still a moral wrong to do. But I would say it's a greater moral wrong to let children starve to death, absent this choice being there. I think that falls in line with the duties of Christian ethics, and I also think it's a tough question.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that there's a great or right answer. Like I actually looked through some church fathers' writings to try to find answers on this, and as shocking as it may be, church fathers don't really sit around and pontificate as to whether or not you may have to eat a dead body in a survival situation, right? So it's actually hard to find the information on it. I'm just kind of left to my own logical deductions on this.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because the one thing that does apply to, which was something that we did discuss in this debate, is in terms of violence against somebody invading your home, etc. As clergy, we're not supposed to engage in violence. In fact, if I did to defend my family, I would be deposed. That said, the question always comes up, and it comes up among clergy. People ask, well, what about the fact that, what if I have to defend my kid from a robber or a rapist or a killer? Well, you take the deposition. You just take it, because ultimately, as you know, it would be weird to value your own clerical status over your child.
Right.
So sometimes you have to make a hard decision. It's just part of it.
Yeah, I understand. Made by Jim Bob for $2 says, dogs have rights. Finn have the right to eat meat.
No, he does not. He doesn't have the right to violate the rights of other animals. Same with this cat.
Well, the cat, I was
He's
going to
a
say, the
cat
named Finn, that poor suffering cat,
He's a big, strong kitty.
He's just trying to escape now. He's like, I don't want this discussion, man. I just want some meat.
Dave 2P3 says, love the debate. Great show. That's for both of you. Appreciate that. He also sent in $20, said absolutely nothing. Just wanted to show support for the program. $5 comes in from AC. Says, there is an industry for abortion. Hens have trauma, but not mothers and fathers.
Oh, I see what he's saying. Yeah, so birth can be traumatic. Postpartum depression is extremely common, and there's quite a few suicides as a result. So, abortions can be traumatic, but that's a decision that the mother's making for themselves. when you buy eggs, whatever abuse that the hen goes through, that's not their choice.
What about the person that's being aborted?
Well, if they're non-sentient, then they're absolutely not going through trauma.
Ali G for $2 says, Joseph, why has God never healed an amputee?
God has healed amputees historically. That's where the icon of Saint John of Damascus, I believe it is, with the 3 hands shows up. Because what had happened was the emir cut off his hand because of his writings while he was in prison, and the Theotokos healed his hand. So when the jailers returned, they saw that he had 2 hands, even though the 3rd hand was cut off. And that's what's symbolized in the icon. It's not common, but it can occur.
Is there any photographic evidence of this?
Of the hand or of the
of the person not having a hand and then having a hand again?
Well, considering that occurred in the 8th century, I would say probably weren't cameras back then. But I'm sure that there are modern healings that do have some sort of evidence. So we can debate that in another. I'd love to debate the question of miracles.
Sure. God saves Kyrie Elison for $50 in what is it? What is SEK? Is that something
South Korea? I thought
no, it's not. It's like something. I don't know. It's like Swedish money or something. I can't ever remember.
Swedish kroner. Let me just see.
Yeah. You can't make an omelet without breaking some vegans. I believe that is how the saying goes. Lord have mercy. Okay. Daver.
It's Krona, by the way.
Yeah, okay. Daver sends in $5 and says, VG, if an abortion was done ethically according to you, would it be vegan to consume that abortion miscarriage?
Yeah, so I already answered that question. Yeah, I don't see, I can't think of an argument for why it wouldn't be, like, unless somehow you're going to offend the mother or something. But yeah, at least in a vacuum, yes.
And then Matt sends in a $5 super chat and says, this has been a great debate. It's also interesting that I agree with Andrew that adults can play video games and it can be healthy for them. I appreciate that very much, Matt. Enslaved by Truth, member for 2 months, says, can we check the material tag on VG's chair? Is it made from ethically aborted fetus skins?
Yeah, it's synthetic leather. I checked before I bought it.
Gotcha. AC for $5 says, can VG disprove a soul image of God at conception, and why veganism tied to so much communism, Gnosticism, and Satanism? Pretty loaded question, but I'll let you take a crack at it.
Yeah. So there's something called an unfalsifiable claim. You could claim anything. You could claim a glib glob exists that's somehow different from a soul at conception. Okay, like maybe a glib glob exists. I don't need to disprove that. It's your job to prove it, and I haven't seen adequate proof of a soul. And why is
adequate proof of a lobster's consciousness?
Right. Well, again, it's kind of up for debate, but from what I've seen, the general consensus is they are sentient. And why is veganism tied to so much communism, Gnosticism, and Satanism? Communism, well, there's a lot of left-leaning vegans, but from my experience, most aren't in favor of communism. They're more democratic socialists. Gnosticism, again, like you're talking about younger people who are just a little more progressive. You're going to see less atheism, more atheism, less, theism. Satanism, I literally don't know what the hell you're talking about. I have not met any vegan Satanists yet. I have met vegan Nazis, surprisingly enough, but not any vegan Satanists.
For $2, define sentience. Can each of you define sentience?
So sentience is the ability to have a subjective experience. That is what sentience is. You could use something like consciousness interchangeably, but the typical definition is ability to have a subjective experience.
I would define it as awareness, in the sense that if a creature is capable of being aware of its surroundings, then it is sentient. That said, that's not a very high bar for me.
That's a little more like sapience, but sentience would be required for that.
Okay.
All right. Fair enough. Over on the Dono chat side for $5, Orthodox Midwife says, Rachel's book came in the mail today and I'm stuck at home with a fever. Shout out to Occult Feminism for making my day better. You're very welcome. Thank you for buying the book. That goes directly to Andrew Wilson's Gun Slush Fund. $15 comes in from Toe Knuckles, who says, thanks for all the great work, Crucible. This is for the cigarette fund. Hey, I appreciate that very much. $10 comes in from Sentient Produce Aisle. Vegan Gains. Vegan Gains. Would you eat any of the Veggie Tales cartoon characters? Oh, dude, that's pretty funny. Come on, that one's good.
I'm not familiar with VeggieTales. I've
What?
heard of it before, but I'm not familiar with it.
You'd eat Bob the tomato?
That's pretty good. That was
Well,
pretty funny.
okay, if they're sentient vegetables, then
No. Fair enough. $5 comes in from Quay, who says, question for Vegan Gains. Let's say we got a fetus shake, a kind of eggnog, just the chicken eggs were replaced with clumps of cells from consensual and legal abortions. Can you name the trait of this drink that will disqualify it as a legit vegan meal?
No. I don't see why it would not be vegan.
I don't want to touch this.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the last. No, I'm sorry. There was a couple more that came in. $5 comes in from AK, who says, 1 in a million diseases that are much more expensive and complicated than late-term abortions still get studied and treated. Any random emergency room can do a late-term abortion. It would still exist without a subsidy. Maybe, but would it be reduced is the question. And isn't the whole point of this whole thing supposed to be harm reduction? And if you could save, let's say, even 50,000 lives because you took these measures that reduced funding by 80%, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you do that? I think that's kind of the point. $5 comes in from JK Fuerte, who says, VG, your girlfriend and dog have equal rights. Someone has a gun to your head and you have to eat one of them. Who do you choose and what's your justification?
I think I'd ask my wife first. She really, really loves Finn, so I'd have to ask her.
Would you dismiss whatever she gave as her preference, though? Because like I would. If my wife said, no, save the dog and not, I'd be like, shut up. I'm not doing that shit. You're stupid. That's what I would say to her, literally. I'd be like, no, I'm not doing that.
I think I'd respect her wishes.
No, wait, really?
I don't think she'd forgive me if I killed Finn, if she wanted Finn to live.
I feel like you're going to be having a discussion about this later.
Maybe.
Probably not. We've actually talked about this sort of thing before.
If we discovered that plants were also sentient, would VG just starve to death?
Possibly. Like if we did discover plants were sentient, like some might be sentient, some might not be. Kind of depends, but maybe it depends on the degree of sentience too. Like sentience is just a subjective experience. So if plants could say only experience like the color blue, I wouldn't really care about that sentient experience.
Okay. And then a last minute super chat came in from Matt for $2 who says, and it says, I love the Ukraine. Man, he's got some strange super chats tonight. Anyway, I appreciate all the super chats and support for the stream tonight. Before we wrap it up, I want to give both of these gentlemen who did a great job debating this subject, by the way, it was a lot of fun, the opportunity to shout their respective channels out where you can find them for all of you who are latecomers. We'll start with you, Vegan Gains. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, so you can find me on YouTube, Vegan Gains. I'm also on Instagram at vegangains.real. And I know you'll hate this. I have an OnlyFans, and I might do a photo shoot with a transsexual soon. So you can find me on OnlyFans at Vegan Gains.
Okay, appreciate that very much. And then Father Joseph Swayton, go ahead, shout your channel out where everybody can find you.
Yeah, we're as I mentioned, we're on YouTube at NFTU News and Apologetics. You can go to our website at nftu.net. Where you can see where we reach out to others on social media, etc. So I'm pretty easy to find, whether on Twitter, Gab, Discord, you name it. You can always reach out if you have any questions about orthodoxy or other issues. But and I'd like to thank Andrew for hosting me. hopefully I can see if we can kidnap Andrew for a show. We'll see.
No problem. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We would normally do callers this night, but I didn't realize that my vetting mod, he actually had the night off. So I didn't have anybody to vet callers. So that was like, oops. And I have to vet them. Unfortunately, the show is at a size where trolls come in and do all kinds of shit. You guys know how it goes. So anyway, appreciate it very much. You guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for coming on the Crucible this evening. With that, we're going to get out of here, guys. Appreciate everybody showing up tonight. I hope you enjoyed the debate. From all of us here at the Crucible to all of you out there in Crucible land, have a wonderful night.